Now we move to with our program. So, yeah, Dr. David, please come in, David Spiller. So, the next presentation will be, again, it's toward mitigating health challenges and the production pressures. So the farm automation, we have in our farms automated system, but maybe it's not fully operated, and we need to get the most from them in order to avoid or minimize the risk of infections and getting much better and healthy flocks. So the next presentation will be with Dr. David Spiller. David Spiller is the co-founder and COO of Global Livestock System Monitoring and Optimization Service, Optifarm. Optifarm was established in 2015, which is the venture capital-backed technology agonist system monitoring and insight service that support timely interventions currently for poultry farms. So it's provide the updated knowledge and information about the automated systems and how to get the benefit and the most from them. And yes, Doctor, please come on. And we hope we can get the benefit from the presentation. So may I ask you, please to keep your phone on silent mode, please. Keep your phone, please, on the silent mode. Yes, thank you.
Lovely. So, microphone's working. Brilliant. So, thank you very much for having me, and thank you to RTAP for asking me to come along. If I get the right buttons. So, this is me. This is one of my farms back in the UK, and so I am a broiler farmer in the UK. We produce around 10 million birds per year and sell those to a processor. For me, I have lots and lots of data, but I want to know what to do with it. I don't really want lots of data and not doing anything with it, which is where I came up with. Yeah, sorry, I'll keep to the side. So I came up with Optifarm because I wanted a novel way to deal with data. For me, when I look at data, and we're going to touch on automation and technology, it's really about the why. I don't want to know what my problems are, I want to know why have I got these problems. And obviously we've heard lots of talks about animal health and vaccines and that sort of thing. And my business now has gone into pig production into North America and Europe as well as poultry. But that's a bit of background on me. I live right in the centre of the UK, a place called Chesterfield, and I work all over the world. But I guess there are four main reasons for me why I think we might need automation on the farm. Well, the first one is, can it save me any money by reducing my costs? So some automation that makes my energy usage more efficient is very beneficial. I want to think about things that make life or my tasks much easier. Things like, my personal life, I use Google Maps. I also want something that maybe does something for me. I do my shopping now and someone delivers it for me. That makes my life much easier. So I'm very keen on any automation that does something for me. And of course, I want to make some more money. So that's also really important. But what are the areas that really we're needing to automate? Well, the first one I see all over the world is a labour problem. Doesn't matter where I go in the world, we're all struggling to get labour out on the farms and in our business. I think there's also things like the internal environment for our birds is never as perfect as it could be. The control panels are trying to do their best, the control panel companies are trying to invent systems that can do a better job, but rarely do I see these set up and operating as perfect as they should be. One of the biggest things I notice when I go around farms is the simple things like feeder and drinker heights. How often do we see drinkers that are too low? More than too high, but sometimes too high. And certainly feeders where birds are leaning down into the pan, and when they've got a lot of breast meat, they're finding that uncomfortable. So if we had an automatic way to set heights on things like feeders and drinkers, it'd be surprising how beneficial that could be. Water pressure management. Rarely do my farm staff get their water pressures correct in the drinker lines, and that's quite a big job for them to go around and manage. Feed management. The most common issue we see on farms around the world is there isn't food in front of the birds. That is the biggest, most common issue we get. Either they ran out of food, there's a breakdown, or the silo yes, there's disease prediction and analysis very relevant to the talks we've had, and also people are looking at vaccinations and disease management on farm. That's a key area. And the physical task of catching birds as well, we're starting to see more mechanisation around that. Cleaning facilities for ourselves, we're washing our farms 8 times per year. That's a lot of work that would be better done with some automation, and then also some data capture and what we do with the data. So there's a lot of areas that we can look at automation. But principally, I would say the biggest risk is labour shortage. That is the one that should be driving most of this. Then you get things like we can't be with those animals 24 hours a day, but the automation, the robotics, the sensors, the computers, they can. And also we see that technology is bringing value in other sectors. Look at how they build the motor car today. You're very, very different to how they used to do it 30, 40 years ago. There's an increasing need to validate the animal's welfare, and can we use automation? And I'll show you some examples of people doing that with automation. And then we have the sustainability commitments that people have got to show. And then, of course, we need to keep an eye on the margins, and the margins are getting tighter. So anything we can do with automation to drive our margins is a good thing. But it's important to remember that automation really has got to come from completing this cycle of, yes, find an issue, yes, understand the issue, which is a big part of my life, but then you've got to deliver that action. And the only value is created to deliver the action bit. In this first 2 sections, you're just finding knowledge and information. You're not making any money. So the value of farm automation systems and monitoring, well, it can free up the farm staff, it can deliver improved performance, it'll increase the peace of mind, it'll improve timeliness of actions, really key, and that's come up quite a bit in previous talks around animal health and how we get in and treat them on time. And we do other actions on time to optimise their own well-being. And then implementing standardisation, there may be all sorts of protocols for administering vaccines, medication, or just managing a farm. How often are they implemented properly? We need to look at help around that. And going with that is this idea of consistency. You know, for me as a broiler business, I want every flock making me money. Not just 6 of my 8 flocks a year, every flock must make me money. So I need that consistency. So this is some data from one of my units where we were operating around here with our gross margin, and we decided to put in a lot more automation and technology. And what we saw was a step change. Okay, you still get variability. It hasn't got to a point where it's got rid of all of my variability, but we could say that there was a step change. But the risk of all this automation that I'm going to show you and we're going to look at is that you could spend $1 to earn $1. And that is a problem. We need to spend $1 and earn $5. And that is one of the challenges of automation that we're seeing on poultry units today. The other way I want to look at it is this graph here. If I think that I've got one flock here where I didn't do so well in the middle at the start, but then I picked up in the middle and had a good middle period. This flock had a good starting period, but not so good at the end. And then this one had a poor growth cycle and a real spurt at the end. Well, imagine if I could get the perfect flock of the best start, middle and finish. Then you get a step change. We're not talking about spending $1 to earn $1, we're spending $1 to make $10. And that's the key. We've got to be able to carry it all the way through the system. But why aren't we using farm automation as much as we should be? Well, firstly, there's limited options on the market. I'll show you some, but it's limited what's out there. It's too expensive. I look at a lot of this stuff and it's 7, 8, 9 years to pay back. That's too long. It needs to pay back in 2 or 3 years. The value proposition is limited. They tell me I'm going to make more money. They tell me I'm going to save my costs. But when I do it with my actual business model, it doesn't work. They don't suit fitting to farms you already have. If you build a brand new farm, you can design it for some of the automation solutions. You can't put it in all of the old farms that are out there today. And we can't just go and knock down the farms that we've got. So they can't be used across all farms, which is a limiting factor. The effectiveness is not proven, it's still quite new. They're often too complex to work with, and my staff can't manage them and repair them. They have high maintenance demands, because they don't like working in a chicken shed. They might be fine in a warehouse, but they're not so good when you put them with dust and ammonia in a chicken shed. And there might be some biosecurity challenges, either keeping that technology clean and washing it and disinfecting it, or someone has to come in and maintain it, and so they are my biosecurity risk. And ultimately, I'm not emotionally bought into it. I'm not laying in bed at night desiring automation on my farm, other than I have problems I want to solve, but I can't see the solution. So I'm not emotionally bought in to putting that onto my farm. So what is technically possible today? I'm not going to go through all of them, but there is a difference between what is technically possible today and what is commercially viable today. So technically, there's actually a lot of things that you could do today if you were a research facility and you had a very healthy budget. You could put a lot of this stuff in there and do a lot of things. I'm not going to go through everything. If you want a copy of the slides, you're very welcome. Ask Artat or myself and we'll get you a PDF copy. And technically, this sort of thing is possible. This is a surgeon operating on a human. We all see this now. I've had this video clip for a while. But if they can operate on a human from many, many miles away, why can't veterinarians do my post-mortems remotely? Why do I have to wait for you to drive to my farm and come and do a post-mortem? Why do I have to get my birds and bring them to you? Why can't we have facilities set up on farms where veterinarians can do post-mortems remotely? It's technically possible. That doesn't mean it's commercially possible or commercially viable. But it just gives you an idea of what can be done. So what's commercially available today, and I could go and buy today, is a different type of thing. Some of the things we're seeing is around feed management. People are weighing the feed in the silos, they're linking that data back to the feed mill, they're automatically scheduling the trucks to deliver the feed, they're automatically scheduling the pelleting plants to make the feed, and everything is done automatically with no humans involved. And they're reporting to me significant efficiencies around doing that and making sure that they optimise the running of the feed mill as well as the farms. There are things like lasers to break up the clumping of birds. It's used for scaring wild birds as well, but if you're rearing breeding stock, rearing pullets for the laying sector, and the young birds start to pile on each other, a camera can detect that, and a laser will go in and dance around to break them up. And it'll do that 24 hours a day. So there's all sorts of things like that, robotics, and we'll run through some of this and see what we want to go through. But as I say, I'm not going to go through every single one. So let's have a look at some examples. Well, we all know this one, automation through the control panels. These companies are trying to get these panels to be better and smarter and more automatic. The problem is, I would estimate 50% of these panels in the world have never been touched from the day an engineer set them up when they built the farm. They were set up by an engineer, not a chicken farmer, and the chicken farmer doesn't know how to run it, and so it is left with the same settings it had when the manufacturer installed it. That's crazy. My panels are adjusted every day by somebody who's just fine-tuning depending on the needs of that flock, the weather at that time, or whatever else is going on. And the more these companies try and make these systems automatic, the more complicated they get, the further from the mind of a farm manager they become. So we have a problem. A very sophisticated piece of equipment that's trying to be operated by someone with limited training, who has no emotional investment in it, who doesn't understand. So what do? They go and put the switches in manual. I find more panels with switches in manual than anything else. If it was my idea, you would never design a panel with a manual switch. Get rid of that switch. Because rarely is the manual switch smarter than the computer if the computer was set up properly. So that is what's out there on controlling. Feed inventory, I touched on this, I'm seeing more and more of this in large companies now, where they are putting different ways of measuring the feed in the silos, whether they scan from the top with lasers, whether they've got load cells, there's all sorts of different ways to do it. But they are linking it all the way through to the production of the feed and the delivery of the feed. So they optimise their trucks and they never run out of food. Remember, the most common issue that we see at Optifarm around the world in broilers is no food in front of them. It's the most common thing. It's so obvious, but it's the most common thing. And very often because they've run out or there's a breakdown or bridging. Behavioural behavioural tracking is becoming a big thing, and we're seeing more and more of this around automated behavioural tracking. A lot of it started from camera systems where they were weighing chickens to understand how heavy the birds were, and they've gone on to understand their business model needs to do more. So what they're doing is they're watching the birds, watching what they're doing, and then reporting back to the business around what the birds are doing. So a lot of it's around imagery. There is a bit of a challenge about how you keep the lenses clean in a dusty environment, because once you get a lot of dust on those lenses, they're not as accurate. But there are a number of different systems for doing this. And then there's another way you can do activity, and also a way of looking at how we bring artificial intelligence and automation into how we run the farms. And so I'll run through a couple of slides on what we've been doing, just to give you an example of where some of this is going. So what we did as a farmer, I knew that my chickens will change their drinking behaviour when anything isn't right. If I'm hot, if I'm cold, if I'm sick, if I'm not growing properly, if I've run out of food, I will change how much water I'm drinking at that moment. So we devised a model that says what you can do is watch the last 3 days and predict the next 15 minutes. And if you don't do what you've been doing for the last 3 days, then potentially I know that there might be something wrong, and I can then automatically go and look at everything else that's going on. So it's a use of artificial intelligence to do some automation and keep an eye on these animals without necessarily high technology, just a water meter. We then explore everything else that's going on in the control panel. Did a fan come on? Did someone turn the lights off? What is it that went on? And you can start to then understand what's going on, why it's going on, and what's causing the problems, all automatically, every 15 minutes without any humans involved. And this is a sort of graph that shows you. The orange line is where you predict what the birds are going to drink. The blue line is what they actually drank, so you can see it's pretty accurate. The shaded area is a tolerance, because these automated systems, it's not a perfect world. You have to give them a tolerance. And you can see a red dot on the end there where the water intake was much lower than the prediction. That is very flock specific, farm specific, barn specific. It's not about genetic potential and genetic targets. It's about those birds in that barn at that moment change their behaviour at that point. And then you can start to automatically look at what caused it. So in that instance there, the ventilation increased. Fans came on and the birds went down. Probably too much air over them. And that's an automatic way of doing assessments like a farm manager might do. And where I think, and this isn't just for us at Optifarm, but where I think automation is going in data analytics is this type of thing. So this is some data that happened to come from our system, but it doesn't matter, you take it from wherever you want. And instead of someone sitting down and reviewing that, because that takes time, we can bring automation in. So what we do is we feed all of that data into a language model like ChatGPT. And you ask it to summarise for you all of that. And it does it in about 1 second for next to minimal cost. And as long as you ask the right questions, and it's a paid version of the language model, it's not the free one we might be using, it'll start to tell you, I tell you where I think your problem is with house 1 and house 6. And I think your problem, the most common issue we've been seeing might be around humidity. So all of a sudden, I don't need to do data analytics. I now have a summary tool, an automation tool, that will do all of that for me to free me up to be doing other things. And where it's going is eventually, I could ask a smart speaker, I could ask my car, I could have a podcast, and I'll just say, where's my biggest problem now? That's all I want to know. I don't want to go and sit and do a load of data analytics. I really don't. Automation in this world of data summarising is what I can see is coming in all parts of any manufacturing, but certainly in farming and agriculture where the data can be quite complicated. We don't have the data scientists. Let's use these smart automation tools. It's very, very cost effective. If we bring it back to some hardware, we've got robots that are out and about. We have some of these on test on some of our farms, and we've helped develop some of them. The robots are running around trying to do things. It is a challenge. Getting robots to move through chickens is a real problem. All right, we've struggled to get the chickens to get out of the way. They like the robot and they run to it, and then they stop the robot being able to move forward. So some go on a rail overhead. Problem then is the cost of the rail becomes quite expensive. One thing I would very quickly say is, if you put a robot into a barn of broilers, you will increase your growth rate, you will increase your uniformity, and you will improve your feed conversion. And the only theory I can see to that today is because normally there is dominance around feed pans and drinkers by the dominant birds. When a robot passes through, those dominant birds go after the robot, the less dominant birds can now get at food and water. And I know later on we're going to hear about some feeding regimes from Brighton, which will be interesting to see, but that's the only theory I've got as a farmer as to why, when my birds move around more, I still get a better feed conversion and better growth rates. It's likely to be the dominance. One of the robotic platforms, the Scout, actually will analyse the droppings as it goes over. It will analyse the faeces and it will score them for healthy and unhealthy. So I can get a map that tells me where in my barn, where in my shed I've got poor droppings, and I can monitor a trend of those droppings coming and going. So I can step in, acidify the water, give a treatment, whatever I might want to do, but the cameras are automatically monitoring the shape, colour and the dry matter content of those faeces, which is pretty interesting. They're then moving on to look at things like identifying mortality, so they can start to tell me how many dead birds I have in my barn, where they've died. The potential is to take a photograph and send that to veterinarians and let the veterinarian have a view of that dead bird and where it was. And the future of that is possibly to collect the dead bird with a robot and weigh it. So then as a veterinarian and the farming business, we will get pictures, we'll get weights, and we'll get the location where they died. Really, really useful data that's going to start to come through. The industry is challenging a bit with this. Robotic tasks. A lot of robots are invented to do things. Pack boxes, weld a car, do something. It's quite tricky to find a task in the barn that we want them to do. They are doing some moving bedding around and things, but I'm not seeing value in that as a farmer, but they are trying to look at it. I mentioned bird weighing. I'm not dwelling on it. Lots of different systems for doing it. For me, it doesn't make me any money because I'm not the processor. I just sell the birds based on the weight on the lorry, so I'm not overly spending money on this, but there are lots and lots of automated systems for weighing birds. This is an interesting one, when you can automatically regulate pressures in drinker lines and you can set it for different ages of birds, so therefore it'll increase the pressure automatically as the birds get older. One of the biggest challenges to get my staff to do is to keep adjusting water pressures on the farm. This one I really love, which is either automatic flushing of the drinker lines, so when we're vaccinating in the water, we can open up a solenoid, flush all the lines through, make sure those lines are primed with the vaccine within a minute. Or the bottom one is actually a recirculation method, where the water's going all the way around, and we can then look to test that water to check it's clean. Instead of just going to the end of the line, it's going round and round and round. Some of the challenges with these, particularly the top one, is if I think that I have primed my lines with my vaccine, but one of my solenoids has stuck, that line wasn't primed, and I think it was. So there can be a problem with this technology if it fails, which is why you have a lot of maintenance costs if you're not careful. Drinking water hygiene, we're seeing a move towards this sort of system where instead of having a can next to us and we've just fixed 1% dose of chlorine or hydrogen peroxide into the water, we're monitoring the water and then making the products on farm. Whether we're making the hydrogen peroxide on farm or whether we're using electrolyzed water and creating chlorine on farm, we're having these automated systems that are much more sophisticated than just a standard add 1% or 2%. This one I mentioned, it's about the lasers dispersing birds, and some people are using it externally to keep birds away for biosecurity, and it just dances a laser around. This one I thought was quite interesting. One of the problems for a lot of farm staff is just carrying the mortality out of the farm. This is on a monorail, on a solid rail in the roof, and it'll move down the barn with the farmer and then take itself outside and empty the dead birds into a bin outside. So it just makes that role of the farmer that little bit easier. Let's see if we can get it to. And biosecurity, we had a great talk on biosecurity yesterday, and what we are seeing is automation going all the way through to the potential where vehicles and people can be tracked by companies like Farm Health Guardian, and it prevents you being able to get into the barn even if you wanted to. So this idea that people can bypass biosecurity measures, this sort of automation that's coming will stop that. You'll have electronic locks and you just won't be allowed in because it knows you were at a high-risk farm, therefore I'm now not going to let you into this barn. So those sorts of things are coming. We're seeing a bit of this happening around, particularly in Europe, on-farm hatching, and they're placing eggs on the floor at 18 days of incubation and then letting them hatch out on the farm. So that's quite interesting to see where that goes. There are some challenges around vaccination for this sort of process. So they're doing more on-farm vaccination, and I've heard lots of great stuff about how do we control on-farm vaccinations. Companies are looking at automated egg sexing primarily for the layer sector because they don't want the males hatching off with limited use for the males. But interestingly, as the cost comes down, will we want to sex the broilers and farm the males and females in separate barns? That may be a possibility instead of having the fence across. Today, I don't do it because of the cost of sexing those chicks, but maybe this technology will lower that cost. So what might be possible going forward? Well, I think the ventilation systems are going to get smarter. They're going to look at weather forecasts and they're going to be more predicting rather than working on what's happening now. I think people everywhere are trying to work out how to collect dead birds automatically because that is a task that can be done. We're seeing in some parts of the world this concept that you don't have full-time staff on a farm. You have lots of technology and automation where you can, and then you deploy the humans to the farm only when needed. One of my clients is asking me, could I have it where my farmer goes there once every 3 days, not every day? So that's the idea, not to remove humans completely, but maybe only send them when they're needed. This one's an interesting one. Lots of companies have got diagnostic systems and some very smart analysis tools for diseases, but ultimately, how do you take the samples at the farm? Because if you rely on my farm staff, that's not a very good protocol for sampling. So people are looking at automated ways of taking samples with robotics and other measures, and I think that is coming. Sound is a very interesting one. There's a lot of information in sound, and a few companies are trying to analyse sound within the barn to help us understand automatically a bit more of what's going on. And what I'd also say is, at what point are we going to positively influence the behaviour automatically rather than passively just recording it? If I want my chickens more active, then I need to do something. Rather than just saying they're not very active, well, let's automatically stimulate them and do that automatically in case I'm not on the farm at that moment. So what do we need to happen for all of this? Well, the first thing is we need connectivity. And I would say that for lots of parts of the world, connectivity is a cost thing, not an engineering thing. There are more and more solutions. It's just whether you want to spend that sort of money in getting connectivity. We need to invest in time and money on ideas and don't leave it just to the startups and the research companies. Get involved. We need to sort of change our approach and take some risks as an industry, and that's really challenging when our margins are so tight. But if we don't put money into it, then don't be surprised if you don't develop anything. We've got to increase our desire to take a risk on that, and we've got to build some trust into the systems and the data. And then we also need to increase the level of data integration. None of this automation is going to run on one sensor in one barn. You need it feeding from lots of different systems, from the veterinarians, from the feed mills, from the control panel. We need to integrate all of that. But of course the biggest thing, and the biggest challenge for all this, anywhere in the world, is trust. And there's two reasons. We don't trust because we know or we don't know. But either way, we don't trust it. We don't trust the technology, we don't trust the data, we don't trust the connectivity, and we don't trust the companies that are selling it to us. So trust is the biggest barrier to all this. But we do need this integration because we've got to be able to hook up lots of different bits of data from lots of different basis. And no one company can expect to develop one system that's going to be everyone's answer. So we're going to have to start to bring in, much like on your mobile phone, you can have an app from lots of different places on one phone. We're going to have to go the same way with agriculture. That's the only way it's going to work. And of course some standardisation would be lovely, because at the moment I can tell you that at my digital business I have around 20 different data connections, and every one is slightly different. That is very expensive to set up, very expensive to manage. So we need to get some common ground on data formats and data security and data ownership. And without having these sort of standards, we're going to be in a muddle. And that's kind of where we are at the moment. Lots of different people doing lots of little things. We need to find a way to bring it all together, and we're going to have some standards around data for us to do that. What is still looking away though? There are some things that I think are still a little way from automation. This is the biggest challenge. As somebody who now owns an artificial intelligence company, can I program my artificial intelligence to decide whether to cull a sick bird? No, I can't. It's an emotional judgment as much as it is a scientific or a factual one. And that breeding emotion into artificial intelligence is near impossible today. So I think just the simple fact that in a broiler barn you will have to cull some sick and lame birds at some point restricts a task and fully farming with no humans. So that means that this idea of a completely human-free farming environment, I don't see. Yes, you can get rid of a lot of the tasks and you can spend lots of money doing it, but you have principal things like culling that are very difficult to do. The computers are not good at emotion. They just can't do it. I think also this one I'm struggling with, you'll be pleased to know for the veterinarians in the room, I don't see a fully remote veterinarian service for livestock farming today. I think it can be more efficient, I think it can be smarter, I think it could embrace some of the technologies, but do I think that you would never need a veterinarian? No. You need that skill, you need that person with the knowledge and experience to really be able to support you as a veterinarian. And I also don't see, for lots of reasons, that we're going to get to a fully automated world when it comes to vaccination and medication. I think, the idea of just having lots of raw material of medication and vaccination on a farm, and there's a computer that decides when to open and close the valve and dose it, I don't see that. So there's some of these things here that I think are not impossible in 50 years maybe, but I don't see it coming in the next 5 or 10 years. They're a little way away. So in conclusion, automation at farm level is really varied, and as I travel the world, I see lots and lots of different things, different ideas, different possibilities. There are multiple options available. I've shown you a big list, but I don't know about you guys in the room. I'm not buying it all. I have a lot of it under research, but I'm not buying a lot of it and putting it in all of my barns because of the reasons I've said. There are many new options coming, and the good thing is some of these are linked to subscriptions, so you don't have to pay out tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars to get started. You will end up paying a monthly fee for some of these. There are very few of these technologies that are knitted together though, and that has got to come. And I think the industry is starting to work towards that now, but it's taking time. Ultimately, I still think labour is the biggest risk to live animal production today. I think it's the biggest risk to most of us that are in this business of producing animal protein, and I think it's the biggest risk that will drive the biggest change. Labour. Labour will force us into automation to some degree. Whether that's because now we need split shifts, with people working 7 days and then handing over to someone else for 7 days, and now I need procedures and policies to do that, I don't know. Whether it's to remove and reduce the amount of labour we need, I don't know. But it is the biggest problem I have. If I didn't have a labour problem, I could farm 30 million birds a year, no problem. I just can't find the people, and nor can anyone else. Just remember that some tasks are likely not to be done by automation. I think, culling sick birds is the easiest one to think about. And I'd also point out to you, this is something that's happened in the last couple of years. There's a slowdown in the investment in startups that are developing automation for you and me. The venture capital funds, the investment banks, the private equities, they've realised that they're not earning money when they invest in these startups for livestock production. So they've taken the money away. That means now there isn't a pipe that's feeding through lots and lots of new ideas. They've stalled, and some of them have gone out of business. And farming businesses need to drive the development. Ultimately, it's us. If we're not spending, if we're not taking the risk, if we're not engaging in these automated systems, then I can come back here in 5 years' time and use the same slides. Okay, it's down to us to spend the money and decide what we're willing to buy, and then those companies will give us the solutions. So hopefully, we're in good time, and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, David, for the nice presentation. It's good to know that artificial intelligence is now involved in the process of farm automation. So, questions, please. Time for questions.
Yeah, so the question was, is it cost effective? A lot of it isn't.
And did you see anybody using that kind of
I don't see anyone on large scale using all of these sorts of ideas. I see most of the things I presented to you, I see somewhere in the world, but not necessarily all of it together.
Maybe the manufacturer of these techniques who advise people to get and then
Yeah, I think you're right, the manufacturers need to convince us. Some of it is because the solutions are local to one part of the world and they don't have a network to distribute around the whole world yet. The other problem is that people will come to me and can come to you and say, this is how it earns you money. And then when you look at it, you say, but that's not my business model. So just a simple example is, lots of people with automation look at the benefit of improved feed conversion. It's our biggest cost as a broiler farmer, so let's improve your feed conversion. So they come along and they say, 68%, 70% of your cost is going to be feed, and I can improve it by 5%, therefore I can make you this much money. But if you are an integrated business where you're processing those animals, and you consider your whole cost, from chip all the way through to in a packet, out to the retail or consumer, food is probably less than 50%. And so they don't understand our business models to be able to justify to us that they can make us the money we're going to make. Yeah, so I think labour's the big driver, and I think labour will drive a lot of it. But one of the problems with all of it, they don't understand our models, so they can't justify how it earns us any money. And that's why I think there's scope with artificial intelligence to look at how do we understand data, how do we summarise the data, how do we get our questions answered in an automated way without necessarily all the robots and all the valves and all the mechanics, because we're not actually doing a bad job on farm. You know, we're often chasing the few percent improvement. It's not like it's a disaster. And so maybe there are new areas to look at.
Do we have any more questions?
Yes.
Angela, can you please pass on the mic? We have questions.
Thank you for your presentation. There is any system for cleaning of cages?
So is there an automated system for cleaning cages? Is that what you're saying? Yeah. There are robotic washing machines, robotic cleaning systems. The principle works today that you have to go and do the first so many, and it remembers where you went with with the robotic arm, and then it will repeat for you. From my experience, things like cage systems are still way too complicated for those robotic washing systems to manage. They can do maybe a broiler arm, if you go and check behind them. They can do some other species, but I've not seen one successfully doing a cage system. And actually, when we got involved on some cage systems for broilers before, that hygiene and cleaning turned out to be their biggest problem. For sure, carrying over viruses.
Because the cages is more complicated and it has more details and parts. So I asked about inspection and any company, equipment company, design effective system to control or to clean the cages, especially cages, very big houses, and need more care and need more biosecurity and control. So I asked about this. If there is any company we can change with you.
Yeah, totally. I'm with you. There is a need. One of the problems is how big is that market globally? Because the millions of dollars it will take to develop a system to clean a cage system, is there enough cage systems? Even though there's a lot, is there enough in the world versus a robot that makes a cardboard box, which can be used all over the world in every factory? And that's one of the challenges. What I do think is maybe they could develop something that will do 50, 60, 70% of it. Maybe not all of it, and there's a bit of human needed for getting in and just the awkward areas, but could I do the big, larger parts of it? Possibly. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. David, for the interesting presentation. You mentioned a lot of AI practice in the farm. My question about laid egg on the farm for hatching. They will transfer egg from the hatcher at day 19 to the farm. There is no effect about this transferring from the hatcher to farm, and how many, what is there a limit distance maximum limit between the farm and the hatchery?
Okay, great question, thank you for that. So it's about the on-farm hatching. For our own farms, our customer won't let us do it, they sell us day-old chicks. My customers that do it, there are a few different reasons why they do it. One is they say they can make more money. They can buy an 18-day incubated egg, or 19 days, cheaper than they can buy the day-old chicken. They'll then set them in the barn, let them hatch out. They're also utilising what might have been a barn that was empty for those 2 or 3 days. They can hatch out. They can also, depending on how well they manage those hatching eggs, find that they actually have a hatch window around day 20, not day 21. So now they're gaining an extra day's growth before they sell them on the market. So of course they're bigger. But in reality, they're just a day older. There are some problems, however, in that firstly your farm manager becomes a hatchery manager. Is that a good thing? So what they do is they candle the eggs at day 18, 19, so in theory only the live eggs are going out to the farms. But if you have a poor hatch, you don't have an ability to bring any more chicks in. And if you have a good hatch, you end up with too many. So there is a problem in managing the stocking density of what goes into the barn. There is this challenge around vaccination. Typically they're doing 2 vaccinations on the farm, whereas we might only do 1 in the UK. So that is a problem. But there is within Europe, and it's different parts of the world, but in Europe there's a big drive towards this well-being, welfare perception. And the consumer likes the idea that the egg was moving around in the lorry, not the chick being thrown around in the lorry. And so for that reason it's happening. Distance-wise, it depends on how good your lorries are and how well you can maintain those egg temperatures. Particularly as a farmer, I've discovered it's about overheating of those eggs, not keeping them warm. You actually find at that late stage the eggs are getting pretty warm, and if you can't get enough airflow through the trolleys on the lorry and you're going long distance, then you have a risk of overheating them inside the egg.
Also, please can you mention the temperature of the house during this time?
Yeah, so the temperature of the house, if you're on farm hatching, originally as a farmer I thought it would be you have to turn the heat right up. The problem is actually the embryo is generating too much heat. So if we want an eggshell temperature of 30, 30.5, something like this, you're probably only going to have an air temperature in the barn of 28.5, 29. And we have to track that egg temperature and alter the ventilation to try and keep them from overheating.
With low airflow.
So there's only minimal airflow. We use the normal ventilation we would use for a day-old chick. So maybe 1 or 2 small fans going, just to keep the temperature and take some of the heat away from the eggs. But yeah, the biggest problem is overheating the eggs, not keeping them hot.
Thank you for amazing information.
Hello. Do you have any actual data from any farm or any house before using this concept and after using this concept in FCR mortality results for
And when you, thank you for the question, when you say, are you talking about the whole concept of automation or the on-farm hatching, or which do you refer to?
you have farm in UK, you apply this concept in this farm, and you have data before and data after.
Yeah, so we applied the concept of automation and technology into the farm, but I would say that we were already a top 10% grower for our group. We were already performing very well when we put it in. I would suggest it was somewhere around a 5%, 4 to 5% uplift. But there were some costs, and it depends on how you consider those costs in your calculation. There is more maintenance. There's a different type of person who has to look after that technology, so their wages may be a little bit more. So there are other costs within there. But generally, for every $1 we spend, we would have got $2.5 back. Not amazing, but enough that it made it worthwhile. But I seem to have stopped. I seem to have reached what I found is practical. And now I'm not buying the latest robots as yet. I have got lots of automation, but not every single thing that is possible because the new ones are getting too expensive.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, just to keep our time effective and managed. So I'd like to thank you, David, for the nice presentation and discussion.
Thank you so much to attendees. Please note if you have any further questions, you can write it down on the writing pad provided. Thank you for bearing with us. We still have 2 more important sessions with Dr. Diana Barusa and Dr. Brian Fancher to follow. As organizers of the first of its kind poultry academy in the region, we greatly value your input and strive to continuously improve the experience for all our attendees. In this spirit, we would like to extend an invitation to each one of you to share your feedback which you may have regarding the event. To facilitate this process, we are now distributing our QR cards which will be placed in front of you. I would request you all to please scan the QR code and grace us with your important feedback. This feedback is a suggestion for future topics, comments on the organization, or any other insights you wish to share with us. All kinds of constructive feedbacks are very wholeheartedly welcomed. I once again request all attendees to please grace us with your valuable feedback. These feedback could be suggestions for future topics, comments on this event or our future events to follow up, our organization or any other insights you wish to share. All constructive feedbacks from your side will be wholeheartedly welcomed. I hope all attendees have received the QR codes. I would request you all once again to please spare 5 minutes of your time and grace us with your valuable feedback. These feedback would be your suggestions for future topics or organizing skills or any insights or any further topics you would love to discuss. believe the cards have been distributed now. I thank you all for sparing us your time. Your contributions will not only help us in refining our future events, but also ensure that we continue to meet your expectations and deliver value to our industry. Thank you once again. With this, I would like to announce a 30-minute coffee and prayer break. The Zohar prayer today in Riyadh will be held at 6 minutes past 12, and we will be resuming back sharply at 12:30, followed by a session by Dr. Diana Murusa. Thank you so much.